We're talking to John McClain of the Houston Chronicle. And of course, it always seems like these things happen at the same time. There's pretty massive news out about Houston area sports as well. J.J. Watt is no longer a member of the Houston Texans. I want to start with this question for you. What did J.J. Watt mean to the city of Houston? How would you assess him as someone who has been in Texas your whole life in terms of the impact that he has had on the marketplace in Houston, but also the state at large? What kind of void is his absence going to create? What did he mean?
J.J. Watt and Earl Campbell, Hall of Fame running backs, are the most popular football players in our city's history. And if you had a Mount Rushmore of the greatest athletes in Houston history, they would be right up there with Keem Olajuwon and Nolan Ryan. That would be the four, with like Jeff Bagwell, Elvin Hayes, Craig Biggio right behind them, A.J. Foyt. But for Watt, because his popularity and respect extended way beyond football. It wasn't just in sports. A lot of people outside sports knew Watt. And, in fact, 3 years ago, my wife and I were on a boat on the Chesapeake Bay, and there was a couple next to us we talked to, and they asked what I did. My wife told them, she said, "We don't care anything about sports except one player." And my wife said, "Who's that?" She said, J.J. Watt. "Really?" And she said, "Well, my husband knows him really well. You thought I was Watt." She was so impressed. Yeah. It had nothing to do with football. It was all about Hurricane Harvey and other things she had read about what he did. And I'll tell you a quick story about Watt. He was picked in 2011. They wanted Aldon Smith from Missouri because the new defensive coordinator, Wade Phillips, thought he'd be a great pass rusher. 49ers traded up, got Aldon Smith, and Texans wanted Watt at Phillips' urging. Fans booed the selection because nobody knew who he was, because he'd been a two-star recruit who went to Central Michigan as a tight end and walked on at Wisconsin. And the first time I paid any attention to Watt was when he put on a great show at the Combine. And so they drafted him, but that was the year of the lockout. So we hadn't met him. We talked to him on the phone, and that was it. And there was a tragic story here, Clay, about a family of, I believe, 4 coming back from a ski trip to Colorado. They had a wreck, and the parents died, and the kids were in the hospital, and both of them had severe damage. And I remember reading a long story in a Chronicle about all the dignitaries from Houston who had gone to see these kids. And way down the bottom it said, "New Houston Texans draft choice, J.J. Watt visited, blah, blah, blah." So when I met Watt, I said, "Did you know the Berry family?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I read that you were visiting them." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because I thought, there just might be something I could do for people in that situation." And to this day, he is very, very close to the 2 kids, and that's just the kind of guy he was. And not so many stories I know about Watt, and he never publicized things. People gave him a hard time. "Oh, he's a publicity hound," all these things he does online, and there was a lot of times he didn't want things out, and the people put it out. So he's going to be missed by many, and we all knew he was gone, so nobody was surprised. But still, it leaves a big hole on their defense because he's still their best defensive player, and it also leaves a huge void in the city of Houston.
Those are amazing stories, and there have been a lot of them come out about J.J. Watt and the impact he had off the field. You mentioned that initially fans were not excited about him. You've covered a lot of Texans games over the years. When did you start to hear from people, hey, this guy could be pretty good? And is there a game you remember where you sat back and you said, boy, the Texans have got themselves something?
When they drafted him, I thought at the time, well, Wade Phillips runs a 3-man front. This guy's going to be a run stuffer. They need a pass rusher, and he's not going to be a pass rusher. And then as Wade pointed out, I don't run a traditional 3-4. I run the Phillips 3-4. And if I got a pass rusher, and I had Reggie White, I had Bruce Smith, and he went over all the ones he'd had, which I knew since I've known Wade since 77, my first training camp. So he turned Watt into a Reggie White-type pass rusher. He's still the only player in history to have at least 20 sacks in back-to-back seasons, and he played great. But as a rookie, he had 5.5 sacks. He's a nice kid. We talked to him in the dressing room. He was always polite, and he was good against the run, pretty good pass rusher. And they won their first division title that year under Gary Kubiak, and then they played their first playoff game against Cincinnati and Houston. And Watt intercepted a pass thrown by Andy Dalton. He was being blocked, and he jumped up and caught the ball, took off, scored a touchdown, ignited the crowd, ignited the Texans, and they went on to hammer the Bengals and win their first playoff game and move into the second round. And we always say that is when the J.J. Watt phenomenon was born.
And obviously everybody wants to win championships. One of the things, I know we talked about this some with you about Deshaun Watson. One of the ideas out there has been that the Texans are somehow a loser franchise. And I said, well, let's go back and look at the data. They're actually one of the 8 or so most successful franchises. When you look at the number of times they've made the playoffs, number of playoff games they've played in, number that they have won over the last decade, it's pretty good. How long among that time would you consider J.J. Watt to have been the face of the franchise, right? You had Jadeveon Clowney, you had Hopkins, you got Deshaun Watson. Those are the guys that everybody kind of thinks of. And now Deshaun Watson's the only one left, right?
Watt, when he won his first of 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and he tied Lawrence Taylor for the most in history, and he did it within the first 5 years of his career. And when he also started doing things off the field, this was way before Hurricane Harvey, he became the face of the franchise. It had been Andre Johnson, and then Watt just took off. It was near the end of Johnson's career, and he stayed that way. Anything that, if J.J. blew his nose, it was big news here. And people liked him, respected him. I'll tell you another story. I did a charity asked if they could auction off a dinner with me, and I said, sure, if you think you can get anything for it. So I met this couple and their teenage daughter at a restaurant, and we're talking, and they're big fans of the Texans and Oilers, and their daughter, who was about 15, wasn't paying any attention. And then he asked me about Watt, and I started talking about Watt, and the daughter stopped and said, you know J.J. Watt? I said, I do. And her dad goes, yeah, he writes about JJ every day. And she burst into tears. Oh, you know JJ Watt? She started crying. And I was waiting for her to ask me a question. She couldn't get the question out. I said, what do you want to know about Watt? And she just couldn't stop wailing because I knew Watt. And I thought, wow, she would have passed out if he'd have walked in the door.
Yeah, it's like the Beatles, huh? That's how impressive that he was. What do you think he does now? We talked a little bit about this already in the show. The odds are out there as to where he might sign. You know him decently. What do you think is driving him at this point? Where do you think he's most likely to be inclined to consider?
Well, I know him very well, and the reason he asked the McNairs, he went over to the house of the controlling owner, Janice McNair, late Bob McNair's wife, and then her son and Cal and his wife Hannah were there, and he asked him for his release, told him he wanted to play for a Super Bowl contender, and he would appreciate if they did it, and they did it. And he'll be 32 in March. He wants to play for a winner. He wants to go somewhere where he can have fun again. Football's not fun here. It hasn't been this year. It's been awful for all the players. And they don't think there's any hope. And that's one reason Deshaun Watson wants out. And I'm sure there's a lot of players that would like to get out, but they don't. They're not J.J. Watt, and they're not Watson. And one of those has nothing to do with the other. One is a 32-year-old player coming off season-low career-low 5 sacks. But the football people will see that and know there was nobody to help him, and hasn't been since Bill O'Brien traded Jadeveon Clowney after the 2018 season. So Watt, last year, I just saw this, ESPN Facts and Figures, was double-teamed more than any edge rusher in the league, which didn't surprise me because they had nobody else to worry about. So I think having another good defensive lineman to play with, everybody thinks Pittsburgh because that's where his brothers are, and they're really close. they got a big cap problem. They don't need a defensive end. People say Green Bay. That's a team he grew up loving, growing up in Wisconsin, and that's a possibility. They've reached a championship game 2 years in a row. They also have cap issues, but they could use a defensive end. The one I keep putting out there are the Titans. They had 19 sacks. He knows Mike Vrabel, knows Shane Bowen. They have a great relationship. Amy Adams Strunk, the owner, gave $1 million for his Hurricane Harvey relief. That just seems to me, Clay, is the ideal team. Tom Brady may call him, hey, come play with us. We're going to compete for a Super Bowl. BA's great to play for. It's a lot of fun here. And I think it'll be one of those four. Truth is, right now, he doesn't know.
It's interesting, and we're talking to John McClain, Houston Chronicle. Last question for you, John. I appreciate all the time with everything you're dealing with, everything the people in Houston are dealing with right now as well. Deshaun Watson. Every time we talk to you, your position, I think, has been pretty consistently clear here. You expect Deshaun Watson to be back playing with the Houston Texans before all is said and done. Is that still your position? What would have to change in order for your opinion to change? I know I saw the quotes from Cal McNair, the owner, when they announced the J.J. Watt news. It seems as if they are still very, very committed to the idea of Deshaun Watson as their quarterback of the future.
They've said they will not trade him. They've said on the record and off the record, and it's never deviated. Now, the only reason I think he'll be playing here this season is he has to come in X number of games. I think it's 4 to get credit for the season as far as his contract. If he held out the whole season, then everything he was owed this year would roll over 2022 when he's supposed to make $35 million instead of 10.4. So I don't see him staying out the whole season. So I think it's going to get really ugly. I've written and said this 100 times, that he and his agent, David Mulligetta, need to meet with Nick Caserio, the new GM, the new coach, David Culley, and have him tell them exactly why he wants out. And then they tell him their vision for turning around this franchise. And he told us in his last Zoom, he just wants to hold up a Lombardi trophy. And as I tell people, Caserio's held up 6. And he's got 6 Super Bowl rings, and he can lay them out on the table and say, I know how to do this, but we need a great quarterback, and you're our great quarterback. And if he still was adamant about being traded, I'd trade him.